Hello and welcome to Angel's Costumes Behind the Scenes. I'm Jeremy Angel.
I'm Jonathan Lippman.
And I'm Richard Green. Today we're going to be playing my interview with Chris Silk. Chris Silk is our head of military department now, but he started as an apprentice. I checked this, he started when he was 18, he's now 27, so he's been with us for 9 years. From apprentice to head of uniform department, ain't a bad step in 9 years, but he stepped up very well to the mark, and when Tom Styles left a little while ago, Chris was the natural successor. Partly because they both wear weird fish t-shirts, have not particularly good beards, and the same kind of tall, lanky sense of humour.
It's just to benefit the people when they see him in the distance. They shout Tom, they think they've got the right person.
He gets very upset as well, because they still do.
But it's interesting how it ties in with the interview that we did at the start with Shelley and the programme of internship and what can ensue from that.
No, definitely. And the thing I found really interesting, which I forgot about Chris and his training, is he trained as a civilian costumier to begin with before Richard and Tom were allowed to get their hands on him.
Yes, yeah. When he came in as part of the interview process, and we established fairly early on that he was interested in sort of military modelling and things like that. But he did the first 3 months he did as a sort of general apprentice downstairs, and then we moved him up to the uniform department.
And then 6 months in the badge room.
Always got to do 6.
Or was that 6 years in the badge room?
Yeah. He's been with us 9 years. Six of those years is in the badge room. No.
Everybody in as big a mess as it started.
Everybody has to start and finish.
It's tidy now.
It is tidy now.
The training he talks about in the side room is our shapes training that we used to do with all the trainees in the apprenticeship. And the way that works, because I've sat in on those, is I found it really, really clever, because they'd have 6 mannequins in front of them for the period they were covering, and then the next day when they came in, the first one or the first 1 and 2 were the same from the last day, so you could see the evolution of how the costume and the shape changed, which I found a really great way of teaching and showing people the shape and why it changed or how. How did the training start for military, Richard? Sorry, that's another way. I know how the civilian training goes, but military training, how do you learn all the different things, or is it just it's just osmosis as you get the jobs?
Kicked down the aisles.
Go and sort out 75 pairs of boots and make sure they're clean. It's a very, very good question.
You went to a public school, you know how these things work.
Well, exactly, yeah. Were you in the OTC? Have you ever at any time done a war game on a ball? Do you like Second World War films? Okay, lad, you're in. It certainly is true that I've had people in the department who had absolutely no experience or concept of uniforms at all. Angela Golding is a classic example of that, and she became one of our really key members of that department. So of course you can teach people things. It certainly helps if you know your conflict histories, and if you know sort of dates of kings and queens, and what a king's crown is and what a queen's crown is. All of this can be taught. But you do have to have, and I'm sure Jonathan will agree, you do have to have a special kind of aptitude.
Oh, you certainly do.
And it's also true that we've had, throughout all of my time, we've had technical advisors that we could ring up and ask things. I mean, John Mollo was always very good. Brian Davis was a technical advisor of ours for a long time, and Tom's available, Tom Styles. And of course, we talked to the guys at the uniform museums, National Army Museum and the Imperial War Museum, if we've got queries. But it is slightly different to civilian costuming, as I'm sure Jonathan will agree. It is more about the detail and getting things right, rather than the appearance is important. Of course it is, because it's got to look smart and it's got to look fitting and it's got to look correct. But there isn't that kind of leeway of interpretation of fashion and, well, okay, this person, it's 1850, but they haven't been able to afford a new set of clothes for 15 years, so actually we can make them a little retro, and all of those things. That doesn't really apply in our case. If a uniform changes at a particular date, then if we do a soldier in the following year, he needs to be in the new uniform.
We hope you've been enjoying these conversations. We've been enjoying your feedback. If you have any questions, please email us on podcast@angels.co.uk, or you can visit our website, which is www.angelsbehindthescenes.com, Or you can find us on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We are /costume podcast. And here is Richard's chat with Chris Silk.
Hello, my name is Richard Green, Production Director of Angels Costumes. Today I'm going to be speaking to Chris Silk, who is now our Head of Uniform Department. As we've said in the past, the purpose of some of these podcasts is to give somebody an idea of how to get into the business and what the business actually consists of and how it functions. Chris is a very good example of somebody who came to us in a fairly standard way, and I'm going to let him talk about how he found us, how we found him, and how the whole process went. So, Chris, hi.
Hello.
Hello. How did you actually discover Angels?
I discovered it through the apprenticeship that I think it was Amersham and Wickham College was offering.
Right. You were at Amersham and Wickham College, or was it just something that you found on their website?
I was not. I'd just done my first year at university, which I hadn't particularly enjoyed. I was kind of having a sort of crisis of identity of like, what am I going to do with myself? I'd been given an ultimatum by my mother at the time to kind of figure something out, or
right.
Consequences will happen.
Mothers have a lot to answer for. We were talking the other day about the way Jonathan got into the business, and indeed the way I got into the business. And my mother found an advert. Jonathan's mother spoke to Tim's wife Eleanor. So yes, mums. If anybody listening out here, if you want a job, the way to do it is through your mother. Sorry, Chris, I interrupted. Carry on.
No, that's absolutely fine. So I just sort of thought, well, what can I possibly do with myself? So I just had a look at apprenticeship courses, and indeed stumbled upon this one that talked about Angels. I think it originally the tagline was uniforms and sort of outfits and that kind of thing. I'll be honest, the only reason I clicked on it is because very close to where I live, there happens to be a school and scout uniform shop called Angels that supply to the local school uniforms and scout associations. So I clicked on it, thinking, why on earth are they offering apprenticeships? It's just a shop.
Sorry, is it like a high street shop then? This is where it's an accredited school and scout uniform supplier.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So it was complete fluke. And obviously, upon clicking several other hyperlinks into the little application, I realised that this wasn't the little shop that I knew about. It was something far bigger.
Did you know beforehand what a theatrical costumiers was?
I touched briefly on it doing drama A level.
Right.
So I knew that there was a kind of industry in it. I couldn't name any. I just assumed at the time that because I know that places like the Globe had their own sort of in-house costume sort of wardrobe, as it were.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I just assumed like people did what we did for the A-level. Like if you wanted a specific thing, you had to go out of your way and try and buy something or find something or borrow from your parents' wardrobe.
Presumably not your mother's in this particular instance.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know though. Right, so
That's a different story altogether.
Yes, that's a separate podcast. So you found the apprenticeship then, and you think it said you, because the reason I ask this is because I actually know, of course I know the history and how we got you, but did it actually say costume and uniforms at that point?
I clicked on it. I think I definitely remember it. Maybe not on the first thing. I think it just said Angel sort of apprenticeship. And I was like, really, Angel? But upon looking down, kind of like the spiel in terms of what sort of things are you interested in, it definitely said there uniforms.
Okay.
And sort of like, if you enjoy sort of military and other things, which is one of the reasons why I thought, well, hey, why not pop off an application?
Because you had an interest in uniforms?
Well, I'd always been interested in history, certainly. From that, it was namely towards military history.
Right.
But as far as costumes, I'd had a very brief introduction during A-level drama, but otherwise I hadn't really gone into the kind.
So you applied for this, and am I right in thinking there was a series of, there were sort of various hurdles you had to jump over, but eventually there was an interview at Hendon, wasn't there?
Yes.
Let's go from there.
Well, there was a big open day as well.
Okay.
Hendon initially. From that, which I must admit I arrived late to.
Okay. Good start.
Yeah, I know, which is one of the reasons why I decided, right, okay, I've got to really try and get some brownie points back at this point. So I really strove to mark myself out
Okay.
from there.
And this was at the open day, was it? So how many people?
This was at the
How
open
many
day.
people were there then, roughly?
It was the whole canteen. The old canteen was full. I got to say there was there must have been 100 or so.
I think that's probably the way we do work it. We have a fairly sort of broad approach. We bring a lot of people in. We then, well, again, Chris, you can say what happened on that particular open day.
It was very interesting. I say it was basically like kind of operates how the Angels tour works, except there's lots of separate groups all going around talking about things, and I decided to chip in where I thought was appropriate. And it was when we bought, I remember my sort of person that was leading me around was a chap called Mike Hodge.
Oh yeah, yep.
And yeah, we got into the uniforms bit. It was all very nice up to that point. We got into the uniforms bit, and it was just like, yes, this is amazing. So I really kind of perked up at this point, and Mike picked up on that. And in fact, I believe he mentioned to Tom Stiles, who was the head of military at the time, that I was interested in uniforms. So Tom then approached me after the sort of touring bit was over, and he came and had a chat with me.
Because again, just so everybody knows, the way these things work is that we take various groups of people around. We go through all the applications, decide which ones we like the look of and the sound of, and then we subdivide those on the particular open day, and groups of us will take smaller groups of applicants around. Normally there are two of the Angel staff at each of those groups, listening to what the applicants have to say. And as Chris has just said, Mike obviously picked up on the fact that you were interested in the uniform side. That sort of got your juices flowing a bit. And then at that point, he spoke to Tom, and we sort of had a separate conversation with you. That was the case, wasn't it?
Yes. So I remember having a sort of, when I came back for the interview, and then I had a kind of separate sub-interview with you and Tom in your office, I remember.
Yeah, I remember. That's right. Yeah. And the rest, almost, as they say, is history. So basically, you had the open day, you then had an interview afterwards, and we offered you a job.
Yes, it was great.
And once we'd got you, once we got our hooks into you, we function a number of ways of training. One of the ways we do it, obviously, is on the job training. So basically, you'll start as a very, very junior member of a department, and you'll basically learn how things are and where things are as it goes along. Is that what we did with you?
Yes. So I started off. So I was in the September. I joined 2012.
2012, yeah.
So it was post all of the Olympic Games stuff that was exciting that you guys did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Initially, I worked in the costume department as opposed to uniforms. This was to kind of gel me in with the rest of the other apprentices, because there was 4 of us in total.
So sorry, I'm interrupting again, but you were part of the apprenticeship scheme that we were running at that point, but we'd already sort of made a note of the fact that you were interested in uniforms, and that's the department that we would probably want to try and fit you in. But you did start downstairs. Again, if you don't know the building, there are basically two levels. The main costume level is on the ground floor. The military department occupies the mezzanine floor. So when I say downstairs, that's where the civilian costumes are. So you started downstairs in the civilian department with the other apprentices. Yes.
Yeah, basically
doing what?
The thing that they get every sort of trainee new person. Literally, I was shown. First of all, done another sort of show around. Got shown. I think my first rail I had to sort out was men's 1920s dress dinnerware. So it was basically just straightening out.
Well, like DJs and evening tail suits, stuff like that.
And it was just straightening out the rails, learning this is where men's 20s sort of evening dress stuff is. Because as I say, if you don't, one of the key things that from when we get new people, certainly upstairs now, is just if you don't know where things are in the building, it doesn't work.
It doesn't work, frankly, does it? So somebody says, go to the 1920s men's evening wear and go and pull me a 42-inch chest jacket. If you don't actually know where that is, you've got a bit of a problem going on. So you were learning the layout of the building, where things were, beginning to straighten things up, looking at shapes, deciding that particular lapel shape wasn't really right for 1920s. It really belonged in the 1960s.
Well, on that note, say every I can't remember when it properly started, and I can't remember the volume at which it's happened, but there was a sort of every afternoon each week, we'd all of these sort of like trainees and apprentices all get pulled aside into a side office, and there would be a group of mannequins laid out, and we also were given a handout, sort of explaining the kind of key points that separates this particular style of suit from, say, a 40s one from a 50s one.
Right.
And we did a whole load of those, say, a sort of spanned from, I don't necessarily think we did a huge amount on sort of ancient Rome, but we sort of starting from sort of medieval, really, up to the sort of 60s, 70s, up to contemporary.
And these were sort of mini tests or mini sort
Yeah.
of lessons about different shapes and,
Yeah.
and how shapes changed and particular periods have particular widths of lapel, for argument's sake,
Yes.
or
And we had to
trouser.
take
Yeah.
notes and things on it as well.
Okay.
And they did a separate one for men's and a separate one for women's.
Did you do both?
I did.
And those went on a sort of so during the week you'd be working in the warehouse on various productions or sorting out things and tidying things, and then once a week there would be a sort of a concentrated lesson on, let's call it, shapes.
Yeah.
Of different sort of styles of costume depending on the eras. Okay.
Mm.
And you were assessed on that, presumably. People were thinking,
Yes,
well,
we got the guy that was running it at one point sort of said, okay, once we'd done, I think we'd finished doing sort of medieval up to Georgian, and the guy that was doing it gave us all a king to do.
right.
So I think I got Henry VII, so I had to kind of make a mannequin, get appropriate accoutrements and things, and build it and make it look pretty. And yeah, that was kind of the test. This was to kind of see if you could fit the mannequin, if it didn't have stains and things on it, and if indeed it was the correct kind of appropriate shape for the style that it was going for.
Right. So it was a sort of a shape and a quality assessment then to
Yeah.
make sure that you actually, didn't get the first particular Henry VII, first particular robe of that period and stick it on thinking that'll do when it had a terrible rip down the back or somebody had spilled
Indeed,
coffee
yeah.
down it. Okay, fine. Good. And was that daunting? Did you enjoy that, or was it?
I did enjoy it immensely. It was daunting, but it was also great fun doing it, because it was like, finally, this is a chance to now actually get into the stock, pull things out for the purposes of putting something together, because up until that point I don't think I'd had that opportunity yet. It was literally just straightening and tidying, which is important.
I mean, we've said in some of these previous interviews that really you need to get the fundamentals, and you have to expect that you're going to need to put a certain amount of time in just working on those basics and fundamentals. Were you also being taught things like measuring costumes at this point?
There was certainly a meeting that I had at one point about certainly for measuring trousers, because apparently, say, the guy doing it had a real bee in his bonnet about the proper way of measuring trousers, which is to measure from the inside of the trouser. So you have to stick the tape measure in to then get the true measurement of the trouser.
Right.
So I'd certainly had that as a lesson. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And what was the first production that you worked on, either with, or first of all, with somebody else? What was the first one you think, oh my God, I'm working on Dad's Army, or whatever it was? What was it?
I genuinely don't think I can remember my first one that I did with someone.
Okay.
So by the turn of the new year, so 2013 was when I went up to uniforms, and that was a whole different set of learning. It wasn't just about learning shapes. I had to learn about dress regulations and patterns and things. So.
Oh, I love our dress regulations. So you sort of did a 3-month general apprenticeship chunk downstairs,
and then I got specialised.
Yeah, because we'd already sort of marked out the fact that you were the sort of person that we did want in the uniform department. And again, I think it's very true to say, and it's not a reflection or a criticism of either side, but there are costumiers that do remarkably well with civilian clothing, but those costumiers sometimes aren't as comfortable with uniforms, and the same is certainly true in my case. I'm far more comfortable working with uniform theatrical costumes than I am with civilian. You'll probably agree with me, but with you've mentioned dress regulations, you either get it right or you don't get it right.
Yeah, I say there's books. Books are lovely thing is that you've got, I mean, reading through certain dress regulations, it goes in a roundabout way of saying that it doesn't have a sort of notched lapel as opposed to another kind, and
Yeah.
extracts half a page worth of just getting to the point. But at least you've got that physical kind of written down do's and don'ts.
Yes, and you can always argue, with a civilian costume, well, okay, we know that in this particular
Exactly.
period, trouser widths got wider, but people would have still kept their old suits, so the trouser would be narrower. Whereas with a uniform, it changes.
Yeah.
There's no, there's very rarely a sort of gradual switch. So you went into the uniform department, and at that point, presumably the sort of the formal lesson side of this has gone. By this point, you're learning on the job very much.
Yes, and I was very lucky in the sense that people that had been in that department that I was sort of directly under, I mean, it was a smaller department anyway, so you got to know everybody pretty quickly. But as I say, I was fortunate because most of the people that have been working there had been working there for well over 10 years or so. So their knowledge was vast and they knew exactly what they were doing.
And again, a point about that is that 10 years of experience in the uniform department, to a certain extent, means knowing what you can get away with and what you can't get away with. I think that's also true, isn't it? That we are first and foremost a costumiers. We're not a museum. We're not a regimental museum or the National Army Museum or anything like that. So there is a certain amount of leeway that we have. It's important to get everything correct, of course it is, but there are degrees of correctness, if you like.
Yeah.
So how many people were in the department at that point? 5?
There was 5 of us.
5, yeah.
Sorry, 6.
With you.
Yes.
And downstairs there were probably about double that, I suppose, possibly even a few more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good. I want to say 15 or so. I might be exaggerating.
In the uniform department, and again, don't forget this is to give people an idea of what it's actually like and behind the scenes, but describe roughly what you saw when you first went into that department on your tour.
I mean, things have changed a bit now with reshuffling of stock, but there was just a wall of block colour, which aesthetically speaking is very nice. So look, you've got a block of sort of 18th century British redcoats. Then next to them you've got a block of British redcoat Napoleonic. As it was just, I guess, something that you can do with uniforms is that whole kind of regulation kind of uniformity of just like boom, British 18th century stuff, then British 19th century stuff, and then progressing into First World War, Second World War.
You're right, we hang it in period, we hang it in colour, we do that with the civilian clothing as well, but it's far more impactful, if that's a word, when you get into the uniform department and see 200 1815 Battle of Waterloo redcoat tunics hanging there. And of course, let's not forget the badge room.
Well, yeah, the badge room, yeah, as I say, the little treasure that a lot of people actually don't see or know about until they actually physically come up, and we have to go in there and sort of say, people sort of come to me and say, oh, because there's a lot of times where people will want sort of like little breast badges or order badges, even if it's not going on a uniform, and so you sort of go, okay, what kind do you
sort
need?
Of diplomats or people at court, Victoria's court.
You bring them in, and the amount of times they always sort of go, oh my god, wow, like all this organised little boxes in here.
Well, paint me a picture of the badge room. Tell me about the badge room, and don't tell me about the reality of the badge room. Badges out on the table and boxes out, and tell me, describe to us how.
The badge room is full of little cubby holes, little drawers, and in each of the drawers are. So I think we've got a system now where we have got the badges taped to the front, or a picture of said badge taped to the front, as well as writing on what it is. But you can, from the badge room, you can construct a person. If you take, say,
we're talking about what I call sometimes the biography of a soldier, or of an actor playing a soldier. So sorry, Chris, I interrupted.
Well, yeah, so say exactly the biography of a soldier. So if we take sort of a Second World War soldier at Arnhem, you can see you've got plenty of options to play with. You sort of say, okay, right, how old is he? Would he likely have seen service in the First World War as well as the Second World War? In which case, he's going to have some First World War medals as well as maybe valedictory medals, say, he earned in the Second World War. Is he a paratrooper, or is he an armoured, or is he an infantry? Depending on that, that'll dictate what kind of division patches he has. What rank is he? That'll dictate his pips or chevrons or what have you. Yeah, and from that, once you know about those things, you can then assign him a beret or a helmet or a jacket or whatever.
So it's not really an exaggeration, is it, to say that we can cater for most units, certainly of the British Armed Forces, quite a lot of the American, and of course the German, because the World War II hasn't really gone away in the wonderful world of film and television. It's still a period and a conflict that people like to make productions about. Russian and French, certainly, and then we start getting a little more obscure. But there are, it's a large, comprehensive collection of badges and insignia of uniforms of the world, pretty much.
Yeah, and so the amount of times you can use a badge for more than 3 or 5 different things, because the amount of things that, so the eagle, whether there are different styles of eagle, the amount of armies at different times or at different parts of the world that have had some sort of eagle as their emblem, you can use the same kind of eagle for several different things.
Sure.
Staggering, really.
Yeah. And I think in a way the uniform department should be a separate podcast if ever there is time. But what I want to do is get back to your training and your starting again.
Yes.
What advice to anybody listening to this thinking, well, it sounds really great, I think I'd like to work in the uniform department at Angels. What advice would you give them? What do you think their best move would be?
Best move for uniforms is, well, and indeed army things in general. It doesn't have to be army, navy, air force. Oh, and also not just touching on military, we do police and fire brigade and trains and that kind of thing as well.
Yes, I mean we used to call it the military department. We now call it the uniform department, because apart from the youth organisations, we cover, as you say, all the civil organisations, the airlines and trains and police of the world and fire brigades and things like that. So yes, it's the uniform department. So somebody wanting to come and work for us in that department, what do you think they need first of all?
Well, as I've already proved, is you don't necessarily need to have a massively over the in-depth knowledge on what uniforms are. Maybe have the sort of broadest outline, like you could tell a Second World War soldier away from a Napoleonic one, that kind of stuff.
Yes.
As I say, a lot of the stuff, reason I got into it is, I watched a lot of war films, or I'd played a lot of historically based video games as well. They can't necessarily be taken as exact, but most of them do follow some sort of standard, in quotation marks. As I say, we have video game people that come into us and basically borrow a uniform so they can get into their games.
Yes, I mean in my day, of course, it was playing with toy soldiers and airfix.
Well, yes, exactly. That as well.
Yeah, and I suppose a history, a grounding in history certainly wouldn't come amiss, would it? If you know that the Napoleonic Wars were this particular period, and you know when the Second World War was, then that certainly helps as well. But yes, the sort of the costuming basics, the measuring, and all of those things we can teach.
Yep.
In many ways, we don't particularly want people who are fully acquainted with the minutiae of uniform sometimes, because, as I said earlier, that isn't really what we're all about. We're about creating an illusion, a believable uniform for a drama.
Absolutely. And sometimes certain costume productions don't necessarily want it 100% accurate.
That's true.
Anyway.
Basically, an interest and an enthusiasm, I suppose, are the two things that people need. And 2012 to 2020, from apprentice to head of uniform department. It's pretty good. In fact, it's very good. It's very good indeed. So, Chris, I think, unless there's anything else you want to sort of add to that, I think that's perfect. I think we can...
Well, as I say, other than, I don't necessarily remember the first job I did with someone, but I do remember the first big show I did on my own.
Go on then.
It was something called Garsington Opera. I think the production was Vert.
Right.
That's what I want to say. And indeed, they didn't. Well, we didn't have it anyway. What they needed was 19th century French dragoons, which we didn't actually have. So I had to come up with an idea outside the box, kind of thinking, hey, what have we got that we can do a set of that will acquaint for opera singers.
Who aren't known for their slimline and svelte shapes.
Because I had to clothe an entire chorus.
Right.
I can't remember what I did. I think I did some sort of shako for the hat, but in the end I ended up using British Guards uniforms, but changed the insignia on the collars and the EPs, and changed the buttons to make them French. Just gave them French insignia.
Right.
Yeah, because Guards uniforms were quite big. We had a lot of them. Just seemed like a quick and easy fix, and the designer was happy with it, so off we went.
Excellent. You're talking about the Guards uniforms as in outside Buckingham Palace?
Yes, sorry, yes, British
Yes. The ones we then had to turn back into Guards uniforms,
yes.
so we could use
as
them
a
on the crown.
As a helpful way, you know which are the larger size Guards uniforms because they currently had French insignia on them.
Yes, just look for the French buttoned ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, there's a whole conversation about what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do with current British Army uniforms. We don't really supposed to depict a Guards uniform as one of the 5 regiments of Guards. We have to mix them up a little bit, but again, that's possibly another conversation. But so Garsington Opera. Funny, isn't it? First show I ever did was with musicians. They were mostly nightclub musicians, so invariably their tummies were bigger than their chests, and I had to do them as guards bandsmen as well. Maybe it's a rite of passage thing. Maybe we all have to start on large size musicians. Anyway, Chris, thank you very much for that. I've thoroughly enjoyed it again, and well, I'll see you very soon, of course. But yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Great. No worries.
Take care. Cheers, Chris. Bye.
Bye-bye.
That was a great interview, Richard. It was nice to finally, as Jonathan said at the beginning, go sort of not full circle, but at least the next step along from Shelley's and into someone who's gone from apprentice all the way to running a department now. And
yeah.
I think you can tell from the interview as well just how much Chris enjoys what he does and enjoyed the experience.
I've got one thing to say as a result of listening to Chris's interview to Richard. Blind man on a galloping horse.
Yeah, and ultimately, Jonathan, you're quite right. To a blind man on a galloping horse, the detail on that particular button is completely and utterly irrelevant. but when a sighted man who's walking along the road comes across that, then it might be slightly different. It's a great phrase, isn't it? Kate Turner of Granada TV used to say it quite a lot. A blind man on a galloping horse would be glad to see the difference between that and that.
That's a great statement. I don't think I've ever heard that before, but when talking about detail and military, what a really interesting, good statement that is.
I think the first occasion that I heard that was I was working on a drama for Granada based on the Birmingham Six.
Oh yes, yeah, I remember it. Yeah.
And there was an issue in terms of the emerging from the rubble of the point of the destruction, and there was a challenging kind of what were the badges, right, for the police, and dust and the smoke and the chaos that was written into the narrative, and out came that expression, and it sort of never left me in terms of what actually the audience will see.
Yes,
and that was her response in the sense of we're driving ourselves mad here to try and get it right, but actually blind man on a galloping horse.
No, and of course in many instances that's exactly the approach we should take.
Not that I want to offend any blind men
or horse riders, indeed. Or jockeys.
Well, it doesn't say anything about horse riding.
Well, that's true. Well, I suppose he could be tied. I
suppose
he could be tied.
The blind man is on a galloping horse.
He could be tied to it. He wouldn't necessarily be in control of the damn thing. In fact, thinking about it, it's highly unlikely that he would be. I should think the last thing that this proverbial blind man on this particular galloping horse would be worrying about is whether the badges are correct as he flashes past the TV screen.
Exactly.
Come for the costume talk, stay for the English grammar and quotation analysis.
But nonetheless, that doesn't mean that I haven't spent the last however many decades trying to get it right and ensuring that it is correct, so that when somebody who is capable of seeing it at a normal speed, they think, yeah, that's right, that looks convincing. And of course, we have touched on this before, this whole thing about clearances now and having permission to use the correct badges.
It is an interesting point, though, which I suppose is the reason for that quotation, which is we spend ages looking at the detail and everything, and originally what detail would have been seen, but that's probably changed now with more clarity and bigger screens.
Yeah, I mean, again, Kate was talking in the context of television screens, which, back then probably were no more than about 22, 24 inches max. And it's a slightly different thing if you're talking about a cinema screen where everything's larger and larger and larger than life. So yeah, a television. I'm not going to labour this point any further, but this proverbial man galloping past a TV screen is slightly different, as if he was going through one of the big sort of multiplexes.
All joking aside, the point is that essentially, in order for a decision to be made as to what is finally used, you need to know what the correct attire should be. And that's a universal statement based on civilian as well as uniform. So that you can make that artistic choice, whatever it might be, you need to know what the actuality is.
I mean, it's that thing I said in one of those early interviews about you need to know what's correct before you can twist it or you can make a change. It's all to do with informed decisions, isn't it, rather than just
and the process therein.
Yeah.
The next conversation we're going to be releasing is my conversation with Vivine Campbell. Vivine is a supervisor who I've actually known since she was a trainee. She came into the industry on a program called FT2, and it's a great chat with one of the nicest, friendliest people you can work with, who is she's always calm. And if you ever see Vivine stressed or anything, something's really, really wrong. But it was a lovely chat to have.
What's FT2 stand for?
Financial Times Supplement.
Well, right, that's what I thought. It was
FT2 used to be a training program. It stood for Film Television Training, and they would put people within the departments for a 2-year course, and you'd be rotated around all the different departments on the film set for 1 year, and then you'd sort of specialize for the final year in your department. So the costume people would train in camera, lighting, and things like that. But we go into it in the conversation. It was a great course that used to exist and does no more.
Well, I look forward to hearing it.
And here is a small excerpt of my conversation with Vivine Campbell.
Even though crowd is really important, there's a little bit of there's not so much pressure on you as crowd, and you can get to be more. Your more creative side can come out, because as a person you sort of build a story within a story. So you could be fitting an essay, and you've made up a story with your other peers to how that person should look, and it's just a bit more. You're more hands-on when you do crowd supervising, and I love doing a good get in and a good get out and the setup and all that. So it's a bit strange, but I do enjoy it.